Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turn the Page. I'm Jen. I'm here today with a fabulous co-host. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I don't know how fabulous I am, but my name is Jessikah, and I've only had coffee this morning, by the way. I and a lot of sugar. So if you're questioning why I'm sounding bonkers, that's why.
Good context. Excellent. And we're here with a really fantastic author of a book that we just both are absolutely mad for. Could I please ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure. My name is James Frankie Thomas, and I am the author of a novel called Idlewild.
Oh, it's so good. And the premise, like just when the book kind of landed in my inbox and I was hooked immediately by this premise. So, but before we get into it, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your journey to this book. Like how did you get into writing and like sort of how, like where did this project come from?
Oh, sure. Oh my gosh. Well, this project was a really long time in the works. I was trying to make a go of it as a writer, as a fiction writer for most of my 20s while doing other jobs, but I was always trying to get published. It's so hard. And then in 2017, when I turned 30, I got a big break. I got into the Iowa Writers Workshop, which was, oh my God, such a life-changing thing. I actually applied to like 7 MFA programs, but I got rejected from all of them except Iowa. Which was the opposite of what I thought would happen. And all the others were in my home area of New York, and Iowa was just like the why not one. But instead, I had to disrupt my whole life and spend 2 years in a very remote place where I had never been before. But thank God, because the Iowa Writers Workshop is just such an amazing place to be alone with your thoughts. And they pay you to sit alone with your thoughts and do pretty much nothing for 2 years. So it's the best chance you're ever going to get to do like your life's work, or to pursue your lifelong dream. In the months leading up to me leaving for Iowa, I kept thinking, like, what should I work on while I'm there? I guess I should write a novel. What should my novel be about? And as my mind circled around it, I started thinking about high school and how I had a very unusual high school experience at a very small private Quaker school in downtown Manhattan in the years after 9/11. And I was a theater kid, and it was just a really intense time for me. It was a happy memory, and I kept thinking, like, there's a story here, and it's such a big story that I've never written about it before. But if I had 2 years just alone by myself to like think about this time in my life, I bet I could get a really good novel out of it. Like, I know there's a novel in here. So I arrived in Iowa, and I immediately started writing this Quaker 9/11 private school New York novel. And actually, what happened was at the end of my first year at Iowa, I workshopped a very early draft of it. It was unfinished. It was only about 200 pages long, this draft. It was like maybe a quarter or a third of the novel. And I workshopped it in my novel workshop. Paul Harding, this wonderful teacher and Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, author of Tinkers, he was the instructor, the professor of this workshop. So he led the discussion of my unfinished draft of Idlewild. And you are not allowed to talk in your own workshop. So I just had to sit there and listen to Paul Harding and my classmates talk about my book in front of me. And what they all kept saying was, they said, it's a really strange choice you've made in your manuscript, is to make one of the 2 main characters a trans man, but not make this explicit. And we think you're being too coy about it. You're hiding this fact, but it's so obvious from page 1 that there's really no point artificially withholding something so obvious. You should just make it clear from page 1. And I wasn't allowed to say anything. So I just sat there with a gigantic exclamation point over my head, I'm sure is what I looked like, because I had not meant to do that at all. It was not even a little bit on my radar that one of the 2 main characters could be trans. And I was upset and mad and confused. And I was like, how is it possible that everyone read it wrong in the exact same way? Like, what are the odds of that? So But before long, I began to think about that critique more seriously, and it took a few more years. But the longer I worked on the book, the more I came to realize that the reason that one of the two main characters appeared to be trans was that I am myself actually trans. And so the process of writing the book was the process of coming out as trans, first to myself and then to the rest of the world. And thank God I realized that, because I think the book came out a lot better now that I know that and can write about it explicitly. But that is the story of how it got written. It took 5 years to write, and we are now 6 years out from when I started to work on it. So it's been quite a journey.
That is a phenomenal story. And it's just, gosh, I have so many questions. But before we get into them, just the immediate, the context of the story really hit me very hard. I was a freshman at NYU when 9/11 happened. And so I was in the middle of that milieu too, and just sort of like that emotional context and all the pop culture references all just really came together in a way that was like, wow, this is very much my teen years. Um, yeah, so if you could talk a little bit more about what it was like to mine your own experience in that way and to really learn something very important about yourself in the process, like that is like absolutely fascinating.
I'm so glad that I really am glad to hear that the evocation of the period worked well for you, because I took that very seriously. It always bothers me when I read novels that are set in a different time and I can see the anachronisms. It bothers me on TV too. Like, I think I have a fairly well-attuned ear for anachronism. So like when a character on Mad Men would say, I'm in a really good place right now, that would bother me, that sort of thing, you know? Um, but that being said, I can't just jump into that 2002 mindset. I really had to refamiliarize myself with how we talked back then. So in that sense, I really approached the novel like historical fiction. I was incredibly careful. Okay, now that I say that, I'm sure someone is going to write in and say they found an anachronism. But I did my absolute very best to avoid anachronisms and to make sure that every single line of dialogue was period accurate. And if I wasn't sure, I had systems for checking whether we were saying certain phrases yet in 2002, 2003. One of my favorite research methods was, you know this because you're librarians, when you do a Google search, you can customize the results to be only from a certain time period. And luckily, the internet was big enough in 2002 and 2003 that I could customize my results to end with 2003. So I would do the Google set. I would Google the phrase I was searching for. I think collective action was a phrase I searched at one point, because I thought, like, were we saying collective action yet, or did that enter our vocabularies during the later labor movements of the 2020s? So I would Google the phrase collective action, and it wasn't enough to see if it came up in Google results from before 2003. I wanted to see how often it came up in Google results and in what context it came up in Google results. And if I scrolled and I found that people just like weren't saying that phrase very much, I thought, I got to rephrase this. I don't think we would have said that in 2002. So that was one way I situated myself in time as I was writing. I am also incredibly fortunate that I was a committed diarist in high school, especially. So I'm actually 2 years younger than the characters in my novel. So in 2002 and 2003, I was a sophomore in high school, while my characters are seniors. But I kept a really detailed diary in 2002 and 2003. And it was a little embarrassing to go back and reread, obviously. But what I was mostly doing in searching through it, partly I was pulling up, situations that I could fictionalize. The opening scene, which is a description of the 1-year anniversary of 9/11 in the high school, is largely taken from a diary entry. But more than that, I was looking for slang. I was looking for speech patterns. I was looking for attitudes and how we talked about things. There's one entry that I was so glad to find again because it answered a question I have been asking myself for years, which is, what did kids do to pass the time before they had phones? Like, I literally don't remember what I used to do before I had a phone to look at. And I found an entry where I describe hanging out with some classmates, and in the diary I wrote, and we spent a lot of time reading aloud the warning label on a bucket and making fun of it. That did not make it into the novel, but that sort of thing was really helpful in getting me to re-inhabit the mindset of it's 2002. We have AIM, we have the internet, but the internet is a place you go on. You go on the computer. It's a different place. And really only nerds spend a lot of time in that place. And the rest of us are just grounded in physical reality without our phones. It was challenging. It was so challenging that my next fictional project that I want to start on, I am deciding not to have any characters be of my generation because I'm sick of going back to that place. I don't want any of my characters to use those slang terms anymore. I'm sick of researching the early 2000s. I have gotten that out of my system.
So so the characters, let's talk about them, because I really liked reading them, and I felt that you did. I'm 9/11 happened my first 6 months out of college, and actually I was working at Borders, which is where I met Jen, believe it or not, but not at the same time. I think I don't remember when Jen started working at my Borders, but I think it was, I don't know, Jen, when did we meet? Was it?
I came in for my interview December 2002. So a very
Right. Yeah. So that was, I think I had left around that time. But the reason I mentioned Borders is because that's where I was when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
I was working in the cafe at Borders, and I remember Peggy Ziernan, who was both, it's Ziernan, correct? That's how she pronounces her last name?
Zirin.
Zirin, sorry. Okay, so I remember Peggy Zirin, who was our manager at the time. She was manager for both myself and Jen. We know her very well. She was the one who called a meeting at Info and told all of us what had happened. And it was just the most bizarre experience. And I can't imagine what it was like being in the city during it. Whenever I see Peggy, she always tells me that whenever it's 9/11, she thinks of me because my dad worked in the city and I had been unable to get in touch with him. He did not die that day. But still, it was just this really weird time. You would go someplace that day and you would see these people just kind of living their lives, or when things did happen, people started coming into the cafe and acting like nothing had happened. And they're just give me my cappuccino. And it's really? And I think one of the things about the characters, Faye and
Nell,
they kind of have that weird dissonance, they're in the middle of it, and the two of them are drifters in their own way. And in the wake of this, they drift together. And their friendship, you do such a good job of capturing that high school intense friendship that loners have, where they're friends with this person and it's this is it. You meld together. I believe they call themselves, was it the F and N unit? And everything is a big joke. Everything is a big in joke. Everybody's funny to them. But then, because I think a lot of times, you're really figuring yourself out, whether you are awkward or queer or, in the closet about it, or just in general, a teenager, there does always seem to be a big blowout and something that intense. And, this type of book surrounding toxic friendships or, these really intense situations that blow up are definitely one of my niche jams. They're just really interesting to read about. So I guess I kind of wanted to know how you sort of intertwined their stories and what starting their friendship at that period in time, how the plot sort of spiraled from there.
Oh, that is such an interesting question. I think I have a two-part answer. Part one is, I think it's a little hard to remember this now because 9/11 was such a long time ago. But God, I'm about to say something as corny as 9/11 changed everything. But one of the ways that 9/11 changed everything was, I'm sure you actually do remember it, just this big surge of public patriotism, and suddenly American flags were everywhere. And I think some of them never went away. So it's actually hard to remember that there used to not be American flags everywhere. And then overnight, just everywhere you saw. Luckily, I was at a private religious school, so we did not have to do the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, but everyone in public school did. My brother was in a public school, and he did not have to say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, and then suddenly overnight he did, and he was really weirded out. And I remember being in a, what's it called, like a Yahoo email group, a listserv for people I'd gone to summer camp with, and they were from all over the country. So even within this Yahoo listserv for teenagers, there was suddenly like a shift in tone where some of the campers from red states were like, we can't say anything bad about the president. We just simply must support the president right now. And those of us who were closer to New York and from blue states were like, well, hang on a minute. And even like, it was sort of a microcosm of what was happening with adults all over the country. So I think obviously, if you were a teenager, but not just if you were a teenager, if you were any kind of independent thinking person, it was very hard not to bristle at this just national pressure to be serious and somber and respectful and patriotic. And that is, apart from anything else, just such a good premise for a novel, such a good headspace to set a novel in, this chafing, this resentment against the pressure to be serious. And I mean, I think so many teenagers feel that way anyway. And especially, I think, in the early 2000s, the fad, the style, was to be very nihilistic and very sarcastic and very random. Random humor was big back then. I do think teenagers now are a little more earnest than they used to be. That's just something I've anecdotally observed. But at least when I was a teenager, it was all about being sarcastic, being obnoxious, and maybe this is still true, I don't know. So that was definitely informing the personalities and interactions of the characters. But I also love what you say about the toxicity of the friendship, and how novels about friendships like that are your jam. And you reminded me that when I started working on the novel, I set some rules for myself. And I think some of these rules I ended up violating a little bit, but it was useful to operate under these rules while I was working. And those rules included, I didn't want any of the characters to kiss or have sex with each other. And I didn't want any of the characters to drink and do drugs. Not because I'm a prude or a spoil sport, far from it. But I have just found that often in novels about high school, sex and drugs and alcohol are used to sort of artificially inject drama and excitement into a situation in a way that doesn't feel true to the high school experience. And so the challenge I set for myself working on it was, I really want the friendship to be interesting enough that it will sustain the novel without sex or drugs. If you're listening and this sounds like a deal breaker to you, I do want to say the novel is sexier than I'm making it sound right now. But I think that it's easy to forget how one's high school experience is, for most of us, even if we do have sex or do drugs in high school, that's not really what high school is about for us. High school is about yearning, and it's about complicated friendships and trying to figure out what other people think about you and trying to figure out what you think about yourself. And I really do think that these things are what we remember about high school and what makes us who we are after high school. And I do think it's interesting enough to sustain a novel on its own. I also think this is especially absent a lot of the time from novels about queer adolescence. I enjoy a lot of novels about queer adolescence, but they are so often, I might use the word teleological about hooking up. They are so driven toward a romantic ending, or they're very focused on queer characters getting together and dating each other. And so one of the challenges I set for myself was, I want to portray what queer adolescence is like if you're not lucky enough to end up in a same-sex relationship at the end of it. This isn't just novels. I see this on TV too. Like, obviously, everyone loves romance. I love romance. I am reading romance right now, but this was the challenge I set for myself. And that is my answer to how I approached the friendship writing about it.
So I want to actually ask, because you did kind of touch on a bunch of different things. First of all, I do like that. I think like, so I've heard a lot of different narrative about that. And, I know like back in the day when any story would be a queer story, the couple would always be punished, be it, one would die or, they would be ripped apart horribly. And I know and there's been like a real drive towards, remedying that. And that's great because everybody wants to see a happy ending for somebody like them. But I obviously, in the context of this story, it would, it would not have rung true. And, unfortunately, especially, I mean, I can't say especially back then, I mean, because I feel like, as much progress as there was, there also wasn't. And even now, depending on your life and where you are, it might still be that way. But for Nell and Faye's story, absolutely, this rang very true. But I do, so you mentioned the story being sexier than that. Two things I kind of want to pick up on. First of all, yeah, I get it. And, like growing up in the era of John Hughes movies and like American Pie and all these movies where everybody's having sex and it's like, oh yeah, this is the teenage experience. And then other people are just like, where, when, how? One thing that always, there's two pieces of media that I think about. One is Freaks and Geeks, where the characters, obviously like Daniel is having sex with everybody because that's kind of his character, but like, you have like characters like Nick and Lindsay who are so awkward, and like the younger brother, and like they're not like they have these crushes, but then like when it comes right down to it, it's like, no, this isn't happening. But then also Daria, which I am like a huge fan of Daria.
Oh my God, if I can just interject,
Yeah.
me too. Side note, Daria was one of my influences and inspirations, actually. I love Daria.
Wonderful. So what I'm going to say is, so I have watched and like used to, at one point in my life, I blogged about every episode of Daria because my husband and I are like, we're just going to rewatch this. But one thing I really thought was interesting. Now, first of all, like I am not a fan of Daria's boyfriend. I just think he was kind of a bland character. But one thing I really liked about their arc was there was this whole build up to, are they going to have sex? And they didn't, and it was okay. And it was like, like they got to this moment and then she kind of like was like at the last minute just kind of left and was like, no. But it was so natural to the teenage experience. It's like, yeah, that's okay. That's totally okay. And he wasn't that much of a jerk about it. I just don't like his character. But but getting back to your story, which also deals with pop culture, is Faye is really into slash fan fiction. And this is before, I don't know if this is before fanfiction.net. I think that there was fanfiction.net, definitely before. It's definitely pre AO3 and pre like Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock, because she reads like Sherlock Holmes slash fiction. So if that's the sexy part of the story, can talk a little bit to that. Like, why slash fiction? And what is slash fiction for people who don't know? Because you should.
Gosh, I feel like every time there's like a little explainer about slash fiction in an article, they always have to explain the etymology of the word slash fiction. So like a little article explainer, I will say that slash fiction is fan fiction, specifically imagining that two male characters on a TV show or in a novel get together sexually. And it is so called because of the slash mark used to denote the pairing. So for example, if you write slash fiction about Sherlock Holmes and Watson, you would denote it as Holmes slash Watson. This is what all the article explainers say. And I feel like it's become such a trope to explain it this way that we have really lost sight of the fact that nobody calls it slash fiction anymore. Like, honestly, we are old to still be calling it slash fiction. And actually, it's kind of interesting. I eventually realized, I think there's two reasons that term has fallen out of favor. One is so much fan fiction is gay now that it kind of is beside the point to specify whether it's slash or het. Like, we don't make that distinction anymore. But actually, the other reason is, as librarians, I think you guys will be interested in this reason. The other reason we don't call it slash anymore is that on Tumblr, which displaced LiveJournal as the hub for fan fiction, if you put a slash mark in the hashtags, it would mess up the hashtags and they wouldn't show up in a search. It was like you couldn't use that character in the tags. So to take an example, let's say Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, a very popular slash pairing. If you put a slash between their names in a Tumblr tag, they would not show up in the search. And that is why you'll notice when Tumblr started, during the ascent of Tumblr as the big fandom hub, that is when you started seeing stupid, cutesy little made-up names for slash pairings. And for Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, you may recall that name was Wolfstar.
I thought you were going to say like, oh no, wait, that doesn't, I was going to say Riri, but that's terrible. or Sloopin, that works a little bit better, that flows.
You did start seeing a lot of portmanteau names like Drarry, and you can, if you're listening to this podcast, you can probably think of more, honestly. Like, I don't think there are a lot of listeners to whom this is news. But this is all to say that I realized as I was working on my novel that one of the ways I had to put myself in that 2002 headspace was I really had to remember and reimagine an entirely different internet. And so as you say, fanfiction.net existed. AO3 definitely did not exist. It was amazing how much I had forgotten and had to refamiliarize myself with as I was writing it. I had totally forgotten that you were not allowed to put explicit content on fanfiction.net. They had, inspired by the MPAA rating system, I think you could only go up to an R rating, and then anything rated NC-17 was relegated to adultfanfiction.net. But also the internet was more, I'm forgetting the word, but it was more scattered at the time. So it wasn't AO3 or Tumblr dominating everything. You had like special websites just for Harry Potter fanfiction, special websites just for fanfiction about Sirius Black and Remus Lupin. Balkanized, that's the word I'm looking for. The internet was more balkanized back then, and fandom was more balkanized back then. And LiveJournal was probably an even bigger fandom hub than fanfiction.net, but LiveJournal itself was so balkanized. You had LiveJournal communities. And unfortunately, I just didn't have it in me to recreate all of this in my novel. That would have been too big a project for me. It would have been a different project. So actually, a small regret I have is that the portrayal of LiveJournal in my novel is a little bit oversimplified. I don't have the characters making friends on LiveJournal, and I don't have them meeting strangers in other parts of the world in LiveJournal communities, even though realistically, I think they would have been. But I just didn't have it in me to come up with all that stuff. So instead, I focused only on just the way that fan fiction and slash fiction was a way to get a fix of something that was really hard to find in pop culture back then. I wanted to say, too, on that note, 2002 and 2003 was an interesting time for gay culture because it was out there. Ellen DeGeneres had come out on her sitcom. We had on Friends, there were lesbian characters on Friends. So and there was a gay pride parade in many major cities. So it was not a completely hidden, closeted thing, but you did have to hunt for it. And you would never, ever see gay content in media for children, which I think was a very interesting time to grow up in, because if you were interested in gay stuff and attuned to gay stuff, you had to look for it. You had to know what to look for. You had to hunt. It was maybe in a sort of hidden section of the library. My own school library had 4 gay books, and the section was not on prominent display. But man, when I found it, I tore through it. I read all 4 books. I read Ruby Fruit Jungle, which my school library weirdly had, and I read a biography of Ryan White, and I read a surprisingly informative book called When Someone You Know Is Gay. I read all those in the 8th grade. I think that was it. That was the entire gay section. So Faye and Nell are characters. They are characters who are just constantly sniffing around for the gay section. And, since the amount of gay books and gay content out there is so limited, they are obsessed with looking for it in subtext. And so this is all to say, and slash fiction is part of this too. I think the experience of sniffing out gay stuff during that time period is so characterized by the experience of looking for subtext. And actually, I guess you could say the novel is a novel about looking for subtext. And in that sense, maybe it's a universal gay story, but I think it is really situated in that time period of the early 2000s when gay stuff was there, but largely subtext.
I'm overall, I was really fascinated and very impressed by like the role that fan fiction plays in the story, and indeed like media in general, I think, because it really captures the way in which like media can be like a mirror in which you see yourself before you are ready to sort of like acknowledge who you are on your own terms. And it's sort of like you get those like really kind of almost sacred relationships to like foundational texts who like tell you something, a little something about who you are. And I say that because I see a Velvet Goldmine poster behind you, and that movie was everything to me in high school. Like that was like, I remember being like 16 and I'm like, why is this movie so important to me? And then I was like at 21, I was like, oh, like, so.
I just want to say this is where I do all my Zoom meetings, including tutoring children sometimes. You are the first person who has ever noticed the Velvet Goldmine poster behind me. And now I'm a little self-conscious because it is a crotch shot, but like in a subtle way. Like, I don't know if you could tell. It's like a close-up of a guy in underpants. So I'm wondering if I need to come up with a new Zoom background now. But thank you. My whole life has been leading up to this moment. Have you, sir?
You also talk, another thing that made me laugh, and I certainly was a fan, and I have to go back and watch, but I'm a cheerleader again. But your comment about when they talk about that movie being like, like the movie that every lesbian has to say that they like, I thought that was very funny.
I think that is going to end up being the most controversial line in the entire novel. I have already had friends get mad at me for that line. And truth be told, I have always been cranky about But I'm a Cheerleader. And I am positive at this point it's my own issues and not the movie's fault. And I bet if I revisited it now, I would think it was charming. So I apologize to anyone I may have offended with my character's cranky remarks about But I'm a
I think to be honest, I think it makes sense. I just still, it's like, yeah, okay, fair enough was really more my my reaction. And it is very camp, and it is very, very silly. And I kind of felt like that was like, I felt like almost like when you watch like a John Waters movie, like to me it felt like that was the point. And if you're not really into that camp and that silly and the bright colors.
It's actually interesting you say that, because I'm realizing that what bothered me when I saw it as a teen was not the camp and the bright colors, but the sentimentality. And it ties into what I was just talking about how during that time period, teens were so suspicious of sentimentality. And so that really, oh God, the love scene with the soft guitar music, and they're like under that pink blanket. And then oh my God, the ending when she does the cheer with the stupid.
Oh, that was cringe, as they would say on Tumblr now. That was 110% cringe. Yeah, I mean, for me, I was also just very thrilled to see Dante Bosco acting again. Like I was like, Rufio, yay, welcome back.
Speaking of cringe, that's actually like a really perfect segue that to hit on something that you mentioned before. This is like a perfect anthropological portrait of like theater kids in this time period, because I was a theater kid too. And like the thing that you said about like not needing drugs or sex in order to inflate the stakes, I'm like, yeah, because they're theater kids, like that's why they're bringing all their own drama already. So was that like a milieu that you were also in, and like was that like, did you base that on firsthand experience?
Oh, absolutely. I was the biggest theater kid in the whole world. I mean, it's beyond what I did in high school. It's who I am. It's still such a big part of me. I used to joke that my true gender was theater kid, and I made that joke back before I like fully came out as trans. And now I don't say that anymore because that is not what my gender is now. But it's funny how being a theater kid just like stays with you the rest of your life. And for better or for worse, former theater kids do sniff each other out in public, and we make each other so annoying. Like to this day, I will meet some random person and it will emerge that we were both theater kids in high school, and like we shift into a different mode. We code switch into the most annoying annoying mode that we have available to us, and compare notes on our performances. And oh my God, the grudges that theater kids continue to carry into their eldest ancient years about the roles that they should have gotten but didn't get. It's just amazing how nothing will ever be as emotionally intense as our relationship to the shows we did in high school.
Gosh,
Even
no.
if we do theater later in life, it'll never be the same as being a theater kid.
I just remember so many like parties with the theater kids. Like I would leave the room for 1 second to like use the restroom, and I come back and like everybody has arranged the chairs in a circle and they're all talking about their feelings because like some conflict like came to light, you know, while I was gone for 4 seconds, and I was just like, oh gosh, like this. So yeah, it's just like a really wonderful portrait of that. It's like extraordinarily evocative.
Thank you. That means so much to me. I actually personally think the greatest portrait of theater kids that has ever been made is the Saturday Night Live digital short Crucible Cast Party. Have you seen this?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's like I actually felt almost wounded by it. It felt so real and so recognizable to me. God, that line, that lyric, how I want to flirt, but I don't know how. So I just steal this guy's hat off his head and just sort of walk around. Made me feel like, oh my God, like you gave away my move. Don't tell people that.
I just like, first of all, I just want to know what you're working on after this. And I'm going to watch that digital short the minute we're done with this recording because I don't know how I missed it.
Oh my God, I'm going to watch it too, just so we can watch it together after this is over.
Yeah. Are you working on anything new? Do you have like the next novel in the pipeline, or?
You know, I am happy to say that I have just started a new project, but it is so nascent that there's really very little to say about it. What's been so difficult is Idlewild is such a big novel, and I put so much of myself in it that for, God, years after I finished the final draft, I have felt depleted. I felt like I have written down everything I know, and I don't actually have any more to say, especially like I thought that this was because I transitioned, but then I talked to my friend Sarah Thankum Matthews, whose wonderful book, All This Could Be Different, I highly recommend. And she finished hers around the same time I finished mine. She did not transition, so she told me, no, I actually feel exactly the same way having finished my book. It's not because you're trans, it's just because you finished a novel. But I do think that transitioning adds an extra layer of this, where suddenly I am in this new stage of my life where I am receptive, I am learning, I am picking up all these new rules, I'm meeting new people, and just like getting my sea legs socially and trying to figure out, you know, how do I be cute? What does it mean to be cute? What would be a faux pas? What would be a charming thing to do? And I am so deep in the midst of learning all this that I don't feel qualified to write anything down. But I felt this way for a couple of years now, and I am starting to feel like I have observed enough that I can start to play with writing things down. And I actually just started writing page 1 yesterday, and I realized like I have not started a new project in years. I forgot how this feels. So it's going to be a challenge to get out of like revising mode and editing mode and into just like have fun, just play, don't worry about being bad. I'm excited to get back into that mindset, but it's going to be an adjustment because it has been all Idlewild for 6 years.
I bet. Well, yeah, enjoy. I hope you've enjoyed that well-earned rest, and, you know, Godspeed on the next project. I hope that you'll consider coming back and talking to us about that one too, you know, in time, no rush, you know.
I am, oh my God, I'm so slow. I am the slowest writer. That's why Idlewild took 5 years. I am hoping, you know, fingers crossed that I'll be faster this time, but that was one thing they did not teach me at Iowa was how to write faster. It turns out some people are just slow, and I think I might be one of the slow people, and that's okay. I got to accept that about myself.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really lovely. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it really, really has. Thank you so much. This was just super, super fun. And I think this is just a really good book. Everyone should read it. It's good.
Thank you.
That means so much to me. Thank you so much for having me. This was really, really fun.
All right. Okay, listeners, please pick up Idlewild. By the time that you hear this episode, it will have been out in the world for a couple days. So please pick it up at your favorite library or bookstore, wherever you like to go for those things. Thank you so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.